So tonight we're going to try the second installment on the New Testament Code, book by Robert Eisenman. And as I get more and more into this, having read it before, maybe 2 times, 3 times, it is really, I was going to say deep, but it's contentious with itself, if you know what I mean. There are so many sources, so many characters, so much interplay between them, so many pseudo-characters, so many different names for the same thing, according to our friend, that, well, for me, it's a delight to read because there are some things I've missed in the past. You know, I've done a number of commentaries on the names game that he uses. That is a most fun game to play, to take a look at names, especially in the Acts of the Apostles, and try to match those up with names in the Gospels or names in history, or even names in Acts that may be very well the same person under a number of names. One that's particularly interesting that I've been working on, well, for a couple of years is in Acts. It's a character called Joseph Barsabas Justus. And I think I finally got that figured out. I think that that's the same person as Joseph of Arimathea, because there's no Arimathea in that day and never was. But what we have, if we have a Joseph Barsabas Justus, if we translate those back to Hebrew and then into English, we have Joseph Barsabas, the son of plenty, and Justus would be the just or a Zaddik. So we've got somebody there that's connected with the Essenes or Nazarenes in some way, named Joseph, and he's a person of plenty. And we look at Joseph of Arimathea, and if we can understand that maybe when that got into the Greek language, there was a misunderstanding of what Arimathea is, and we just parse that name a little bit, we get Arimathea. So we've got Joseph Arimathea, and we've got somebody known as Joseph Ari, the lion, Matia, Joseph of Arimathea, Joseph of Arimathea, who just happens to be, according to tradition, a person of great wealth and power, a person in the Sanhedrin, so it says. And we have a guy with a name very similar to that in the Jesus family tomb, whose name is Matia. And after all, that tomb is supposed to be Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. So it fits in real well that one that one bone box with a name on it that nobody I can identify, to me, can be no other than Joseph of Arimathea. So he was called. So we're going to steam over to some place called Antioch. We're going and moving into chapter 1 of the New Testament Code. And if you've read that, I'm sure you made note that in that time there were numerous Antiochs. Of course, the cities were named after the Greek heir to the Seleucid throne, Antiochus. There wasn't just one, not just the one that Daniel's all about, Antiochus Epiphanes, but there were many of them. I think as many as 8 different generations of Antiochus in the Parthian, or I should say the Seleucid Empire, which at that time, the time we're speaking of, was what we call today Syria. it was a break-off of Alexander the Great's empire. When he died, the empire was split into four. Four of his generals took it over. The one portion of Syria was taken over by the general named Seleucus. The Egyptian portion of his empire was taken over by the general named Ptolemy, P-T-O, Ptolemy. And those two were enemies from then on, trying to conquer each other. And in between the two was Palestine. The Seleucid Empire is hardly ever mentioned when we talk about biblical things, because in the Bible, it's usually called something like Syria or Greece or Helen or Hellenist place, but very seldom called Seleucus or the Seleucian Empire, because I don't know why. But in the Maccabees, it's pretty clear that that's the empire that is one of the major antagonists of not only Israel, but Rome. The Roman Empire and the Seleucid Empire, which later became Parthia, I guess, they were constantly at war and fighting over this little wedge of land we call Palestine that was really the bridge to everywhere on the trade route. Take a look at it sometime, the Seleucid Empire. The Seleucid Empire not only included Syria, it included parts of Armenia. Well, I have a map right here. Let's take a look at the map. Share screen. That's not the right page. Let's see if I can get the right page. Can you see the map here on this page?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. What we're looking at here, excuse me, is east of Israel. I don't have any way to move this around. I think Israel's down here someplace where my cursor is. And all this is called the Parthian Empire, becomes the Seleucid Empire in about 300 BC, including Israel down here and Turkey over here. Here's Armenia and the Black Sea. And it stretched way over almost to the coast of India, to the east. And to the west, it went over to the Sinai. And the Ptolemies take over from the Sinai on through Egypt and parts of Libya. But this is the area we're going to kind of focus on tonight. Take a look at these little kingdoms in here. There were buffer kingdoms between Rome and the Seleucid Empire. Armenia went back and forth between the two constantly. And there's this little country here in this map, it's absorbed, called Adiabene. Adiabene. I think this is a very interesting name because we have two words encased in that little country's name, Adia and Bene. Bene, of course, means good or well. And Adia, is it by coincidence? Is the name of the first apostle to go into this area with the gospel of the kingdom. He was very successful. Adia, Thaddeaus. We'll talk more about him later. He was known as Thaddeaus, but in the change of languages, he becomes the great or good Ade. And we have a town here called Edessa, a very important town for trade and passing through. That's why this area was always in dispute. Edessa has another name. probably more prominent at the time that we're looking at, and that is Antioch on the Calaroa River. Edessa was the capital of this Adiabene, and it was ruled by a king at this time whose name was Abgar or Abgarus or Agbar or Agbarus, who we'll talk about in a little bit. But it's Robert Eisenman's thought that of the 5 different Antiochs, this was the one we're dealing with here. Because as it turns out, this particular city, and in fact, the whole little country called Adiabene at that time, was very open to the Nazarene Essene message. And because of a set of a couple letters written between the king of Edessa, King Abgar, and Yahshua HaMashiach, the whole of Adiabene was open up to not only pilgrim Nazarenes, but it was a sanctuary country for all who would come, all Jews that would come, all Nazarene Jews that would come, and Essenes. They were all able to come in here to this Edessa and to be free. We'll look at the letters from King Abgar in a little bit. The other Antiochs, a couple of them are here in what was called Anatolia. We're getting just the very east Anatolia in this map. I'm going to trying to think of what those names are. Well, they're all called Antioch, but usually they're on a river or near something that sets them apart. But I think the most famous Antioch, and the one that most consider the Antioch, where the believers were first called Christians, to be the one in Syria, the westernmost Antioch. That is a little difficult for me to believe. I'm for the Antioch here on the Calaroa, rather than what the church believes about the Antioch over there east, because I read in the histories of that time that in the particular time of the apostles, there was a civil war in the Antioch in Syria, and the civil war was between the Hellenists and the Hebrews that were there. When I say Hellenists, I'm talking about people who had grown up under the influence of Alexander the Great and his successors. Of course, his philosophy was, if you become Greek, we'll let you live. If you don't, we're going to kill you. So for 300 years before the first century, or 200 years, we have the Greek culture being enculturated within the Hebrew nation, to the point where by the first century, we have a lot of Greek-type Jews with Greek names and not so many Hebrews. We get the idea that Israel in this time was full of Hebrews, friendly Hebrews, but it really wasn't till you got around Judea. And even there, the Greek and Roman influence was very great. Now, what was I talking about? Oh, yes, the Civil War there, that the Hellenists, sometime in the 40s, 40 AD, around there, they absolutely annihilated all the Hebrews in that Antioch. And I can't see that the headquarters of Christianity or Nazarene Israel could have possibly been in that area, just because there was such civil strife there that the two cultures, though they were the same, we might say, race, the two cultures of the same race were at each other all the time with bloodshed. Now, Eisenman starts the chapter out with a short essay on Messianism, Christianity, and Essenism. He talks about previous to 70 AD, when Jerusalem was destroyed, Essenism flourished, but after that, the Essenes were pretty much absorbed into different types of sects that are set out in Epiphanius's Panerion, his medicine chest of heresies, which I have here if you ever want to read it. Epiphanius talks about all the early sects of, well, we'll say Christianity, though he would never agree with these sects being Christian, but like offshoots of different understandings of who Messiah, we call Messiah today, was, and then breaking off into various, we might say, denominations. So Essenism, he says, continued on after 70 AD, that all the Essenes that were fighting there, the fighting Essenes that Hippolytus of Rome talks about in about 150 AD, they had been killed. And the rest of the movement is absorbed into sects like the Ebionites, Alcasaites, Nazarenes, Masbuthians, Sabaeans, that is the daily bathers, Manichaeans, and Christians themselves, because that's when the Christian church began to get its start there sometime after 70, when Jerusalem was destroyed. A very interesting reading, the Panerion. Epiphanius has all these different sects. He speaks of them and he tells them why they're heretical sects and they don't fit in the kingdom that he calls the Roman Christianity, the universal Christianity. The Ebionites is a very interesting one because they are spoken of as believing in Yahshua as Messiah of Israel. However, they did not believe that he was this messianic figure that flies through the air and lives forever. They understood him as the great teacher and the founder of the Ebionite movement. Ebion, of course, means the poor, from Hebrew and Aramaic. And he talks about the Nazarenes, which were just like the Ebionites, with the exception of they kept Torah. They kept Torah, and they believed that Yahshua was a divine man, just like the Roman Catholics. They were considered a heresy anyway, simply because they kept the Torah, because at that time, of course, as the Christian church is starting to get popular and Rome begins to accept it and then finally reveal it as the elect religion, believe that keeping the Torah was a sin against God because of Jesus' sacrifice of his life for sin. Therefore, if one didn't trust in his grace, one was sinning, terminally sinning. And so it would be the same today and is in Roman Catholic type churches, that if one keeps the Torah, generally it's thought that those that do are testing the Father and therefore out of his will because they haven't accepted the grace. They figure that law still has something to do with salvation. If you're interested in looking at the Panerion, I have a link to it. And I'll just reiterate now, Robert says that no Christianity as such really existed until after the Bar Kokhba rebellion, which was about 135 AD. But there was instead a conglomerate of non-exclusive movements collectively known as Essenes. And this is one place or one reason why we use the term Essenes, because we are a collection of people that believe very much like these various movements that Epiphanius calls heresies. So now we want to go here from the map. If you've got a scripture, that'd be good. Acts 13. I have it up here. If I can find it. This is just a little awkward. What am I going to do with this? Yes, go over here, okay? No, you're not going to. All these pop-ups. Acts 13, I think verse 14 and on. Paul and his company set sail from Paphos and came to Perga and Pamphylia, and John left them and returned to Jerusalem. And then it says something about Barnabas that I can't see. But they passed on from Perga and came to Antioch of Pisidia. And on the Sabbath day, they went into the synagogues and sat down. After the reading of the law and the prophets, the rulers of the synagogue sent to them, saying, "Brethren, if you have any word of exhortation for the people, say ye now." So Paul stood up and motioning his hands, "Men of Israel, and you that fear God, listen." And he gives the story of Israel right up on the time of the Savior that he reckons. This is not the same Antioch, though, as we're speaking of in Adiabene. This one's in Anatolia, but this is one of the reasons that people are confused about the various Antiochs. Excuse me. I talked a little bit about King Abgar of Adiabene. You might have heard of Helena, his queen. And he had two famous sons, Monobazus, and let's see, what's the other one's name? Oh, come on. I think I've got it in my notes here. Does anybody remember what it is? It's just split from my mind.
No, sorry.
You remember?
No, sorry.
Okay. Monobazus, I always remember him. Izates, that's it. I think you can see this on the screen here in Bible Hub. A little article here. How Helena, the queen of Adiabene, and her son Izates embraced religion, and how Helena supplied the poor with corn. Now, that's what she's known for. Helena was the sister and wife of King Abgar, and she became converted to what we understand as Nazarene Judaism through not only connection with Adia or Thaddeaus, but also the apostles supposedly sent over a missionary there from Damascus. His name was Ananias. Now, we're playing name games here, and we remember the Ananias of Damascus that Paul was sent to when he was blinded on the road. And so we're getting a little bit of name overlap already. And one of the problems with the sons, Izates and Monobazus, one of the reasons why they were very hesitant to go to Judaism after their connection, the connection of their father with Jesus, which we haven't got into yet, but we will, was the idea of circumcision. So one apostle was sent from Damascus, who we know from Josephus as Ananias, to tell them the good news that they didn't have to be circumcised to be believed, that to be believers, that circumcision was really nothing anymore, and that was an old concept that had been put away with the coming and death of Jesus. That law was no longer in service. So we have this disciple coming over for this purpose. And then we have another account of a disciple coming over as well, and his name was Lazarus. Speaking of another name that matches up with the gospel record in regards to somebody that was in the entourage of Yahshua, and Lazarus, of course, was raised from the dead, according to the Gospel of John, chapter 11. Monobazus and Izates became new converts, but the Lazarus taught just the opposite, that they did need to be circumcised. We don't know if either or none of those accounts are true, but something happened that caused this whole family to turn to the Nazarene faith and Judaism and proclaim it in their kingdom, and proclaimed Adiabene to be a sanctuary country for anybody that embraced this faith. And Helena took her sons, buying corn from Egypt, brought it to Jerusalem, helped to stave the famine of 44 AD that's mentioned in Acts, built herself a palace there in Jerusalem, which is still there at this time. I believe they're just starting to tear it down now, the last thing I heard. But Helena was famous in Israel, and her two sons joined up with the freedom fighters there, which were the zealots for the Torah, to fight against Rome. And they were from some other place entirely. But Adiabene, being under the thumb of Rome all these years, these gentlemen wanted to fight against Rome. They couldn't do it in their own country because they had nothing to do it with. So they go to Israel, they become Jews, probably of the Nazarene faith, and they fight in the army against Rome. Unfortunately, both of them are killed. Why is this apropos to the New Testament code? Well, if I'm not mistaken, Robert Eisenman dedicates his book to these two, Izates and Monobazus. We remember in the Clementines, the Nazarene Acts, that there were two disciples that were buried somewhere outside of Jericho, and that they had tombs that would whiten of themselves every year. The Nazarene Act says that they whitened of themselves as a witness to the power of resurrection, and that when the believers of Jerusalem fled Jerusalem at the instigation of Paul's persecutions, that they came across this place and saw the tombs that had whitened of themselves, and that gave them strength and hope. Now, Robert took a group of students down there, I don't think it was that long ago, maybe within the last decade, and they actually found this graveyard outside Jericho. Of course, the stones were gone, the tombs were gone, but the ruins there showed two different and separate tombstones had been there. It's the exact place that the Clementines talked about. And this is an archaeological find that's gotten no recognition whatsoever, yet it is a sign to us, whether it does or not, that there is a great deal of authority behind the text that I call the Nazarene Acts of the Apostles. If you don't have one of those, you need one. Just let me know and I'll send you over an e-book there, or you can get you one. This is one that every believer should read. It's the Travels of Peter, Kipha from Jerusalem to Rome, with Clement of Rome, who purportedly was the second pope of the Catholic Church, keeps the journal of his travels and teachings. It's a tremendous book, changed a lot of lives. So now we'll go back to Adiabene and see what caused the entire country to go over to the Messianic faith. Let me see if I can find actually the letter from King Abgar to Jesus. Here we go. All this stuff I have already spoken about and recorded out at jspresents.org, which you can find. I'm a little tongue-tied tonight, as you can, because as you can see, I'm overwhelmed by rereading this again. There's just so much stuff in there. Now, this text, as it says here, was discovered by Eusebius, the church historian, his ecclesiastical history. He says that he went over there to Antioch himself and dug these letters out of the city records. He says, that's why I know they're authentic. I found them and I translated them from the archives of Edessa relating to Abgar, also known as Abgar the Black. And he translated them from Aramaic. And here's what they said. Abgarus Ukama, the toparch. To Jesus, the good Savior that hath appeared in the parts of Jerusalem, greeting. I've heard concerning thee and thy cures, and they are done of thee without drugs or herbs. For as the report goes, thou makest blind men to see, lame to walk, and cleansest lepers, and casteth out unclean spirits and devils, and those that are affected with long sickness thou healest, and raisest the dead. And having heard all this of thee, I had determined one of two things, either that thou art God come down from heaven, and so doest these things, or art a son of God that doest these things. Therefore, now I have written and entreated thee to trouble thyself to come to me and heal the afflictions that I have, or indeed, I have heard that the Jews even murmur against thee and wish to do thee hurt. And I have a very little city, but am and calmly revered. Reverend? I don't know what that means. The city is sufficient for us both. And that's the end of his letter, but there's an answer here. Blessed art thou that hast believed in me, not having seen me, writes Jesus. For it is written concerning me that they that have seen me shall not believe in me, but they that have not seen me shall believe and live. But concerning that which thou hast written me, to come unto thee, it must needs be that I fulfill all things, for the which I was sent here, and after fulfilling them, should then be taken up unto him that sent me. I'll try a little trick here. And when I am taken up, I will send thee one of my disciples to heal thine affliction and give life to thee and them that are with thee. Later text, it says, add a promise that where this letter is, no enemy shall prevail. And so we find the letter copied and used as an amulet. It was regarded naturally as the palladium of Edessa, but was also thought to act as a protection to individuals. Now, the letters form an integral part of the story of the mission of Thaddeaus, or Adai, and conversion of Edessa. And part of that legend is that Jesus gave the messenger of Abgarus a handkerchief miraculously imprinted with a picture of his face, which we call today the Mandylion. And you might be interested to know that this messenger that brought the letter to Jesus, I believe his name was Ananias again, and that he was also the court painter, and that Ananias actually painted the picture of Jesus' face, and that picture came back to Edessa, went around and around as time went on, ended up in Constantinople, and then disappeared. There's another story about this, that the lady Veronica, who supposedly is the woman with the issue of blood, she came to Jesus in order to get her healed of her insufficiency. And when she did, she was able to minister to him. He washed his face and wiped his face on a towel, and she confiscated the towel because he washed his image right into the towel. Again, called the Mandylion or Mandy Lion. There are good documentaries on the Mandylion. And one of the theories about this is that the Mandylion is also the Shroud of Turin that had been folded up in such a way to show the face part only. Now, when we looked at the video about the DNA on the Shroud of Turin, they had on there another article that they called the Mandylion, that was supposedly a towel that was over his face. It just feeds right back into these legends. And that towel had blood on it. And that they compared the blood on the Mandylion with the blood on the shroud and found them to be identical. They didn't give proof for this. They wouldn't let the Mandylion out of the museum that it was in, somewhere in Turkey, I don't know where. But they affirmed that the blood was the same, and you remember the conclusion to that. When they put that through the DNA ringer, it came out as the blood of the Druze. The Druze is an ethnic variety and separate religion that had originated in Egypt and migrated by the 1st century AD into Galilee. In this particular video, they actually went back to Nazareth and found a family of Druze people that had lived there for generation after generation, tested the blood that they had, and they came up with a match. So supposedly what they're saying there is that still in the Nazareth area, there are people that are of the same group, same tribe, same family as Jesus, still living there, still living in the same situation as they did before. And now they say that they've proven it. Well, that would really be something to find out. Jesus was a Druze rather than a Jew, because there's a difference here. And that prophecy concerning Ethiopia, out of Cush comes my son, or something like that. Was it Egypt? Out of Egypt comes my son, would literally be true if that were true. So this letter, if we can believe Eusebius, has been authenticated by him, and it's written up in his ecclesiastical history. Thaddeaus did go over there, healed Abgar, healed the court, and began to set up a healing ministry there, from which came a large number of converts and a church there. Edessa, Adiabene. or Antioch on the Calaroa. There we go. Let's see here. How much did I get through? Okay, we talked about Damascus a little bit. All right, we're going to go to some other names, but finishing up with Ananias. Ananias and Judas. We've also got in the Acts, you remember the Ananias and Sapphira as well. We think of the high priest that ordered the death of James, another Ananias or Ananus, same name. And in Josephus, over and over, we see Ananias. Let's look at the chat here. Anything? Link to the map. All right, I'll put that in the chat right now. See if I can find it. All this stuff here, I need to go to a bigger screen. This map. It is a nice map. You're going to have to keep it. One thing I wonder is why or how, if we have the good Adi as being the healer of the city, is there a connection with the name of the country? I just wonder how that would happen, or if it was just a coincidence. All right, let's go to Judas. I'm going to look at another name here, how it's connected in with Damascus and with the very things that we're talking about. Was it not in Damascus that Paul met Ananias in the house of Yehuda or Judas? If I'm not mistaken, it was. This same Judas is an alternative name for the Ananias that was the interlocutor between Jesus and King Abgar. This same name is used as one of the teachers of Abgar, Izates, Helena, Monobazus. The one that spoke of circumcision as being necessary for salvation. And in another place I said, and I have read another name there, and of course that's Lazarus. We don't look too closely at what those names mean, though. Josephus' picture of Izates' conversion has another missionary who got to teaching the harem of King Abgar, that circumcision was unnecessary to conversion to Judaism. He didn't teach the king himself. He went into the harem. Now, that is a new approach to do something like that. Now, Eusebius' account of Judas as the interlocutor between Abgar and Jesus, Eisenman says this has got to be the same as this person called Judas in the Gospels and Judas in the Acts. Not speaking of Ishcariot, he comes later. And then he equates this Judas with Jude, the little letter of the scripture, and it is part of tradition that the brother of Yahshua, Jude, did go east as far as India, and that this Jude is also called in this ancient literature Judas Thomas. We know that Toma in Aramaic means twin, And I would say second of twins, because in Greek that's Didymos, which definitely means second of twins with the prefix of di. And if he was a twin, we got to wonder who he was a twin of in that family. In the Egyptian literature, that is the Coptic Gnostic literature, Judas is the twin of Yeshua himself. So, in fact, we have a book called Thomas the Contender. In that book, we have the two twins, Jesus, who's anointed to go forth as the purveyor of the Gnostic secret knowledge, contending with his twin brother, Judas, the twin, Thomas or Didymos. And it's written from the perspective of Judas Thomas. That's usually called Thomas the athlete. Better translated, Thomas the contender. You can take a look at that as well. Judas Thomas, and in the Coptic literature there from Nag Hammadi, we have this Gospel of Thomas that on the front page simply says that it's the writing of Judas Didymos Thomas. We get all three of those names together there in the same place. And then we get this Adai, who Eisenman is identifying again with Thaddeaus and Judas, Thomas, Thaddeaus, Theudas. If you mix up the name Judas with Thaddeaus, you get Theudas. You want Thomas the Contender? Sure. Here we go. I think I've got an audio of that. There it is. The Gnostic Society Library. They got all kinds of stuff there. Then we have another character, Matthew 10:3. We have Lebbeus. And then we have James the Just. He's called in Hegesippus Oblias. And we've got this surname for both James and Matthew named Alphaeus. And then we also have in the Gospels Jude of James, translated wrongly as Jude, son of James. Complexity. Jude of James would indicate that this Jude, who, if he was Thomas and Didymos, was the twin of James, because James is called James the Alphae. Alphae means first, Didymos means second of twins. And though it's not specifically written there, if that was the case, I'm very confident that the literature that has been destroyed, even maybe the Gospel of the Hebrews, would say it right out, because that would be another sign that would draw us back to Perez and Zerah, who were twins. And you could probably think of several more as well that are in the lineage of Jesus and James that were twins, and unusual twins at that. So I want to go over now to Hegesippus. Trying to find it here. Hegesippus's words. Hegesippus was an early Nazarene believer who, probably under pressure, converted to Roman Christianity. And we have fragments from his writings. He was evidently a church historian too. And he tells us a lot about James. And we're talking end of first century AD. Epiphanius, Eusebius, and a couple others pick up Hegesippus' writings and add things to the history of James till we get a great big picture of James that teaches us more about him than we know about the one we call Messiah. This is on my website. I conglomerated the James passages that I could find there. I'm trying to make room on this little screen. See if we can find Eusebius on here. Or Hegesippus, here he is. After the apostles, James, the brother of the master, surnamed the Just, that is Zaddik, signifying a priestly family, who was made head of the assembly at Jerusalem. Many indeed are called James, especially in Eisenman's books. This one was holy from his mother's womb. He drank neither wine nor strong drink, ate no flesh, never shaved or anointed himself with ointment or bathed. Please understand, when it says he never bathed, doesn't mean he didn't take a bath. In those days, they had public baths. If you wanted a bath, you went down to the public bath and you took your clothes off and you bathed with the Greeks. He alone had the privilege of entering the Holy of Holies. Consider that, what that means. Since he indeed did not use woolen vestments, but linen. The priests wore linen. He goes into the Holy of Holies, obviously on Day of Atonement, and he gets away with this. And the only way this could happen is, well, look at the calendars. Difference in calendars. There must have been some kind of deal struck, because as we will see, James was so revered by the people that look what he says in Acts 21 through his elders. Look at the myriads who are zealots for the Torah. He alone had the privilege of entering the Holy of Holies, since indeed he did not use woolen vestments but linen, and he went into the temple and prayed in behalf of the people, insomuch that his knees were reputed to have acquired the hardness of camel's knees. This takes us back, this legend about James' knees, to the Nazarene Acts, or the Clementia, the Clementine homilies, book 1, chapter, I think about 70, where James and his followers are about ready to have a baptism service, and they're sitting on the temple steps, and the enemy, whom we identify with Paul because he was getting letters to go to Damascus to take care of the rest of the believers there, he starts a riot, and he beats James and throws him down the temple steps, breaking his legs, which again sets off the exodus out of Jerusalem of all the believers of Yeshua and James, Yaakov. So when it says that he had knees like camels, the first thing I think, if the account is true, that if he broke his legs, that could probably be why. It says in the Nazarene Acts that Paul left him for dead. Yes, thank you, Kay. Hegesippus starts out with that story too. Now we might as well go into the martyrdom of James. I know our time's about up here, but I'd like to get this on the recording anyway, because a lot of people don't know that there's anything more about James. And I would really recommend reading James, the brother of Jesus. That really sets you up for this New Testament code book, which is twice as hard to read. But knowing this literature will really help us get through the book. When I started with the James the Just years ago, I figured out after the first chapter, I'm not going to be able to read this book until I know the literature. So I gathered the literature up. Some of it I retranslated so other people could have it. I was sublime about what I was finding in those books. So anyway, here's Hegesippus' complete account as republished by Eusebius. But Yaakov, the brother of the master, who, as there were many of this name, was surnamed the Just by all. I think I did this, and yes. All right, down a little bit. Knees his camels in consequences of his habitual supplication and kneeling before Elohim. And indeed, on account of his exceedingly great piety, he was called the Just and Oblias, which literally means a pillar. Zaddik, the righteous one. Ozlcam, I haven't been able to figure that out, which signifies justice and protection of the people. He was the bulwark of Israel, one of the pillars of Israel, as the prophets declare concerning him. Some of the 7 sects, therefore, the people mentioned by me above in my commentaries, ask him, what was the door to Yahshua? Read gate. Read gate, the same word. And he answered that he was the Savior, from which some believe that Yahshua is the Anointed One, but the aforesaid heresies did not believe either a resurrection or that he was coming to give to everyone according to his works. As many, however, as did believe, did so on account of Yaakov. As there were many of the rulers that believed, there arose a tumult among the Jews, scribes and Pharisees, saying that there was danger, that the people would now expect Yahshua to come as Messiah. So they came together. The date is 62 AD, and said to Yaakov, we beg you to restrain the people who are led astray after Yahshua, as if he were the Anointed One. We beg you to persuade all that are coming to the feast of Passover rightly concerning Yahshua, for we all have confidence in you. For we and all the people bear the testimony that you are just, that you do not respect persons. So persuade the people not to be led astray by Yahshua, for we and all the people have great confidence in you. Stand upon the wing of the temple, that you may be conspicuous high up, and your words may easily be heard by all the people, for all the tribes have come together on account of the Passover, with some Gentiles too. Now think first of Matthew 4 and Luke 4. Jesus in the wilderness. Think also of the story of Stephen, in the Acts, as we go through the rest of this. I guess that's all I'm going to get to. The aforesaid scribes and Pharisees placed Yaakov upon a wing of the temple. This is a parapet, literally, and that is the foundation of the temple. Understand the temple is up high, and there is a drop-off of about 30, 40 feet or less, where the people are coming up to the temple, they're getting baptized, changing their clothes, etc. So they're all down below. They come to the wing or the parapet that sticks out there over the gully that contains the people. Declare to us, what is the gate to Yahshua that was crucified? Of course, they have to add that was crucified. He answered with a loud voice, so everyone could hear him up there. Why do you ask me about Yahshua, the Son of Man? He's now sitting in the skies at the right hand of great power and is about to come on the clouds of the sky. And as many were confirmed and gloried in the testimony of Yaakov and said, Hosanna to the Son of David. These same priests and Pharisees said to one another, we have done badly in affording such testimony to Yahshua, but let us go up and cast Yaakov down, that they may dread to believe in him. Think about the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. Hosanna, Psalm 118, the adulation of a king coming, a king of might and power. And in this case, that would stave off the Romans from any more interfering in the government of Jerusalem. And they cried out, oil, oil, the just one himself is deceived. And they fulfilled what is written in Isaiah. Let us take away the just, because he is an offense to us. Wherefore they will eat the fruit of their doings. James in the Epistle of James, he says, you have persecuted, you have killed the righteous one, the just. He does not resist you. So going up, they cast down the just men, saying to one another, let us stone Yaakov, the just. They began to stone him, and he didn't die immediately when cast down, but turning around, he knelt down, saying, I entreat you, O Yahweh, Elohim, and your Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. Robert here says that this is the original saying that was put in the mouth of Yahshua in the Gospels. So it originally comes from James. This is interesting too. Thus they were stoning him when one of the priests of the sons of Rechab, son of the Rechabites. Do you remember about the Rechabites in the prophets? You remember Jonadab was companion of King Jehu, and that Jonadab had a code for his family. Drink no wine, build no houses, live as nomads, etc., etc. So we have a Rechabite priest coming up and saying to the people, stop, what are you doing? The just one is praying for you. And one of them, a fuller, beat out the brains of the just one with the club that he used to beat out clothes. It was thought of that Judas Iscariot was just such a fuller or a dyer. Thus he suffered martyrdom, and they buried him on the spot where his tombstone is still remaining, by the temple. This is one of the reasons that Robert does not believe that the James the Just ossuary is authoritative or authentic. Because he says, right there it says it, Jackson, right there it says. He's buried right there by the temple. Actually, the places where you see the tomb of Zechariah, you know, the pyramid-like pillar that is so obvious and a sight to see when you go to Jerusalem. It's right beside there. He became a faithful witness both to the Jews and Greeks that Yahshua is the anointed one. Immediately after this, look, Vespasian invaded and took Judea. Josephus talks about the fame of James. He has two accounts of this. One of those accounts, right after James is martyred, Josephus says he was stoned. Then we have an appearance by Paul and his brother Costabarus, raising hell, starting a riot there, right? In the same page as the death of James. Then in the other part of Josephus, it slipped my mind, not important. But in another source, then, the Rechabite priest, he's identified as Simon Bar Clopas, or Simon the Canaanian, who was, of course, the brother of James, Jude, and Jesus. Such is the more ample testimony of Hegesippus, in which he fully coincides with Clement. So admirable a man indeed was Jacob, and so celebrated among all for his justice, that even the wiser part of the Jews were of opinion that this was the cause of the immediate siege of Jerusalem. When that last pillar, that Oblias, is knocked out from under Israel, Israel falls. This was widely believed in that day. We had 4 pillars. Rabbi Albin talks about the 4 pillars being John the Baptist, Jesus, James, and John, the 4 pillars. I'm not sure about John. I don't think so. Might be Judas the Galilean, somebody like that, I think. And this continues, and it is a little bit, it has something to do with the next part here. Speaking by the mouth of Eusebius, the words of Josephus. These things, says he, happened to the Jews to avenge Jacob the just, who was the brother of him that is called the Anointed One. You remember in the Gospel of Thomas, when Jesus anoints James to be his successor, he says, heaven and earth were formed on account of you. Can't remember the exact words. You know what I'm talking about. So James the Alphaeus falls, and the whole place falls. Caesar, having learned the death of Festus, sends Albinus as governor of Judea. But the younger Ananus, this is Ananias again, he's the youngest son of the one mentioned in Luke, Annas, the retired high priest. There are 5 of them. We have Caiaphas, his son-in-law, then the other brothers. Theophilus is one of them, interestingly enough. Theophilus, Matityahu, and Ananias. There's one I'm missing there. Ananus, therefore, being of this character, that is unmerciful, of the Sadducees, and supposing that he had a suitable opportunity in consequence of the death of Festus, and Albinus being yet on the way, the governor had not gotten there yet, calls an assembly of the judges, and bringing there the brother of Yeshua, who is called the Anointed One, whose name was Jacob, with some others, he presented an accusation against them as if they had violated the law and committed them to be stoned as criminals. One source tells us that they dug a hole and put James in the hole with his head sticking out of the hole when the fuller hit him with the club. I don't know the source of that, but I have read that. But those of the city that seem most moderate and most accurate in observing the law were greatly offended at this, and secretly sent to the king, begging him to send Ananus with a request not to do these things, saying that he had not acted legally even before. It's true, he did not act legally. In order to execute anyone, the king has to do that. So he usurped the authority of the governor and the king. Some also went out to meet him as he came from Alexandria and inform him that it was not lawful for Ananus to summon the Sanhedrin without his knowledge. Albinus, induced by this account, writes to Ananus in a rage and threatening that he would call him to account. But King Agrippa, for the same reason, took from him the priesthood after he had held it for 3 months and appointed Joshua, the son of Damascus, his successor. These accounts are given respecting Jacob, who is said to have written the first of the epistles general, but it's not to be observed that it is considered spurious, but it is to be observed that it is considered spurious, of course. Not many, indeed, of the ancients have mentioned it, and not even that called the Epistle of Jude, which is also one of the 7 called Catholic epistles. Why doesn't Jude mention it? Because he died before James did. Nevertheless, we know that these, with the rest, are publicly used in most of the assemblies. Use that in an assembly today and see what you get. Also gives us the idea there was not a canon formed at that time, and of course there wasn't. The churches were using a variety of different books and gospels. Well, that's all I can get to today. I want to get into Hebrews and Hellenists, but we'll do that next time. I thank you so much for your patience. And I thank you, Allison, Gary, for your cues. I can see this really excites you, doesn't it? It excites me. All right. Need a drawing. What kind of drawing? What would be helpful?
What the temple looked like, the temple parapet. That's what that part was from.
Okay. Yeah, hold on a minute. I might be able to find that real quick. I've seen pictures of it, so I know they're there. It's like an overhang. Almost. It would be somewhere outside the Solomon's porch here. Ah. So it's talking about somewhere on this foundation and down. This was on Zion, Mount Moriah. And in order for the pilgrims to get up there, they had to go underground through tunnels and gobs of steps, and they had to be baptized on the way up. And so there were lots of stopping places here. I might offer you a piece of fiction that will explain this fully. If I can, let me put it down here. Oh, what's the guy's name? One moment. It's probably in the public domain. Right here it is. This is an old book from 30s probably. Let's see. Oh, it's great. It doesn't say when it was actually written. could probably find this in a PDF if you wanted to. Sholem Ash wrote about the Nazarene, Paul, the situations of the New Testament in the first century, about the Essenes, and he was a very well-noted Jewish writer of literature. And we begin, when he began to write these kind of books, the Jews of the world really turned on him because they didn't want this stuff. And what he wrote was so beautiful and so engaging that they sold like crazy at the time. If you can, get that from the library or look for a PDF. There's one more book here. It's called The Brook. It's by Moore, one of your relatives. The Brook Kerith. I really love this book. I'll tell you why. There are cheap knockoffs of this book that you can get for very little. Don't get them because the print is probably about 2-point print. I've been sucked in on this. I've had several of these. I've given them away. I had a 1910 copy, disappeared in moving. But what's great about this book is that it tells about these characters, and it even tells that the crucifixion, Yeshua dies there, but when he's taken down, he has to recover. So he's taken to Joseph of Arimathea's house in one of the servants' cottages, and he is put there to recover for quite some time. Then he has to be hid out because they think he's dead or arisen. And so they take him down to wilderness camp with the Essenes. You remember what I'm talking about. And so he lives with the Essenes. He's a sheep herder. Then one day, after some years, somebody stumbles into the Essene camp down there looking for a guide. And who is it but Paul? Paul stumbles down there and he meets these guys. And he meets Jesus, who goes under an assumed name at this time. And so Paul begins to suspect things. And so when Paul wants to go to Caesarea to meet Timothy up there, the Essenes assign Jesus to take Paul up there. And Paul keeps asking him questions, keeps digging. Finally, it connects with Paul who this is, that he is alive. And Paul tries to convert Jesus to his new religion. It is hilarious. I wish they would have gone on longer. It just lasts a couple pages, but the book is great. I got a cheap knockoff. You find a good deal, let me know. I'd like to have one I could actually read. All right, time's long up, and I thank you for your patience in dealing with my stuttering tonight. I'll tell you one more thing. I got my tests back after a stress test and that radiation test last week and all, and I'm all opened up. I'm good. So good for another year, right? Just wanted to let you know. Thank you.